I paid for her, Charlotte, not you. 11 words, 12 years of marriage. And when he'd said it, he picked his pen back up and kept writing because he did not believe, not for 1 second, that she would leave. She left at 6 the next morning. If you believe a woman's worth is not measured by what a man is willing to spend on her, subscribe and stay to the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. The candles had been burning for 4 hours, and Charlotte Harrington had not sat down once. She stood near the east wall of the great hall at Harrington Estate, hands folded in front of her, watching the room the way a woman watches a pot she has already salted. 60 guests. Every family of consequence between Richmond and the Rappahannock. The Pembertons, the Ashfords. Old Judge Calloway, who had not accepted an invitation to anything in 3 years, and had accepted this one. She had written every name on that list herself. She had spent 4 days on the seating, 6 days on the menu because the Ashfords would not eat pork, and the judge's stomach could not take anything spiced. She had walked down to the kitchens at 5 that morning to check that the oysters had come in fresh from the coast, and when the wagon was late, she had sent Elias out on the gray mare to meet it on the road. Nobody in that room knew any of it. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. Her husband stood 20 feet away with a glass in his hand, laughing at something Colonel Pemberton had said, and Charlotte watched him the way she had watched him for 12 years, with a kind of attention that had long since stopped being hope and had become something closer to habit. Nathaniel Harrington was 41 years old, and still the handsomest man in the county, and he knew it, and he had never once had to work for a single thing that room contained. Mrs. Harrington. Charlotte turned. Mrs. Ashford had come up beside her, fan snapping shut. "I have been to a great many dinners in this county," the old woman said, "and I have never in my life had a hostess remember that I cannot abide the smell of lilies." "You mentioned it 4 years ago, ma'am, at the Calloway wedding." Mrs. Ashford's eyebrows went up. 4 years ago? "Yes, ma'am." "And you remembered?" "I remember most things," Charlotte said. "It's not a talent, it's only a habit." The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Something passed behind her eyes. Something that was not quite pity and was not quite admiration, but sat somewhere uncomfortable in between. "Your husband," Mrs. Ashford said, "is a very fortunate man." "Thank you, ma'am." "I wonder if anyone has told him." Charlotte did not answer that. She smiled the smile she had been smiling for 12 years, the one that cost her nothing and gave away less, and she looked past the old woman's shoulder to where a serving girl was struggling with a tray of glasses near the doorway. "Excuse me," Charlotte said, and crossed the room to take one end of the tray herself. She heard it half an hour later. She had not meant to. She was passing behind the column near the card tables on her way to tell Elias that the judge's carriage should be brought around early, and the men's voices carried the way men's voices always carry when they have had 3 glasses of anything. "Must say, Harrington, your wife has arranged all this beautifully. She has a head for it. More than a head for it. Half the county's here. My wife couldn't get her own sister to come to supper." Nathaniel laughed. It was a warm, easy laugh, the laugh of a man entirely at his ease in the world. "Charlotte is practical," he said. "That's what I needed." Charlotte stopped walking. She stood there behind the column with a napkin in her hand, and she felt something go very still and very cold in the center of her chest. Practical. Not clever, not gracious, not the reason a single one of you crossed my threshold tonight. Practical. The word you use for a plow horse. The word you use for a good pair of boots. That's what I needed. Past tense. As though she were a thing he had gone out and acquired at a fair price some years ago and had not thought much about since. She waited until her hands were steady. Then she stepped out from behind the column, and she smiled at Colonel Pemberton, and she said, "Colonel, I believe your glass is empty." And she took it from him herself and carried it to the sideboard. Nathaniel did not even look at her when she passed. Victoria Blake arrived at 10 o'clock, which was late enough to be noticed and just early enough not to be rude. She came in on the arm of her brother in a gown of French silk, the color of new cream, and the room did what rooms did when Victoria Blake entered them. It turned. Conversations thinned. A young man near the doors forgot he was holding a plate. Charlotte watched her cross the floor and felt nothing in particular. She had known Victoria since they were girls. Victoria had been beautiful then too, and had understood even then exactly what beauty was worth and exactly how to spend it. Charlotte. Victoria took both her hands. You've outdone yourself. Truly. The flowers alone. Thank you. And you look well. You always look so sensible. That's kind of you. It is, isn't it? Victoria said, and laughed and did not let go of her hands. You know, I always say Charlotte Harrington is the only woman in Virginia who does not need to be looked at to be admired. You do say that, Charlotte agreed. You've said it to me 4 times. Victoria's laugh faltered by exactly 1 beat. Then she recovered and turned her head, and the candlelight caught what was at her throat. Charlotte saw it. Charlotte had seen it before. Not on Victoria. On paper. 3 weeks earlier in the ledger room off the North Hall, going through the quarterly accounts, the way she did every quarter, because Nathaniel had never once opened a ledger in his life. A receipt from Marcus Whitfield Jeweler Richmond. Sapphires set in gold. An amount that had made her sit back in the chair. She had told herself it was a gift for his mother. Then she had remembered his mother had been dead 6 years. She had told herself it was an investment, a resale, something. She had closed the ledger and had not opened it again for 11 days, and she had told no one, and she had gone on ordering the oysters and writing the seating cards, and remembering that Mrs. Ashford could not abide lilies. And now the sapphires were around Victoria Blake's throat, in her own house, at her own table, under her own candles. It's a beautiful necklace, Charlotte heard herself say. Victoria's hand went to it. Her fingers were entirely relaxed. Isn't it a gift? From an admirer, Victoria said, and smiled, and there was something in the smile that was not cruelty exactly. It was worse than cruelty. It was ease. The ease of a woman who has never once had to wonder whether she is standing where she is permitted to stand. A woman doesn't ask Charlotte. She only says thank you. I suppose she does. You should try it sometime. Victoria squeezed her hands and moved on into the room, and Charlotte stood exactly where she was. And across the floor, she saw Nathaniel Harrington turn his head and watch Victoria go, and she saw his face. She had been married to that man for 12 years. She had never once seen him look at her like that. The last carriage rolled out at 1:30 in the morning. Charlotte stayed on her feet for another hour after that. She saw the silver counted. She sat with Hannah, the cook's girl, who had scalded her wrist on the soup pot and had been trying to hide it all night, and she put butter and cold cloth on it herself and told her to sleep late in the morning. She spoke to Elias about the gray mare's shoe. At 2:30, she walked down the North Hall and stopped outside the study door. There was light under it. She stood there for a moment. Her hand was on the latch, and she did not turn it, and she thought quite clearly, if you open this door, you will not be able to close it again. She opened it. Nathaniel was at the desk with his coat off and a glass at his elbow. He did not look up. You're still awake, he said. So are you. Calloway kept me an hour past everyone else. The man cannot stop talking about the turnpike. He turned a page. Sit down if you like. Charlotte did not sit down. She closed the door behind her and stood with her back to it. I want to ask you something. Ask? Was my allowance used for her? The scratch of his pen stopped. He did not look up right away. That was the part she would remember afterward. Not the words, but the pause before them. A man who was surprised would have looked up. A man who was innocent would have looked up. Nathaniel Harrington set down his pen with great care, and only then raised his eyes. I beg your pardon. The quarterly allowance. The 200 that comes to me from my father's estate that you administer, that I have never once questioned in 12 years. Her voice was perfectly level. She was almost proud of how level it was. "There is a receipt from Whitfield in Richmond. Sapphires. And tonight those sapphires walked into my house on Victoria Blake's neck." "You've been going through the accounts." "I keep the accounts, Nathaniel." "That's not an answer to what I said." "It's the only answer there is." She took one step forward. "Was my money used to buy that necklace, yes or no?" He leaned back in the chair. And she would turn this over for years afterward, would take it out and look at it the way you look at a scar. He smiled. Not cruelly. Not even unkindly. He smiled the way a man smiles at a child who has asked why the sky is up. "Charlotte," he said, "I pay for her, not you." She heard the words. She did not for a moment understand them. "Say that again." "You've never once had to ask me for a thing," he said, and there was a patience in his voice that was somehow worse than anger. "You've had this house. You've had this name. You've had a place at every table in this county, and not one soul in it has ever asked where you came from. Do you know what that cost? Do you have any conception of what it cost me to marry a Whitmore in the year 1805? My father. Your father was a merchant with a good year and a great many debts, and when he died, there was less left than anyone expected. And you know that as well as I do." He said it without heat. He said it the way a man reads out a column of figures. "I did not marry you for money, Charlotte. I want that understood. I married you because you were sensible, and I needed a sensible wife, and you have been exactly what I needed for 12 years. You have never given me a moment's trouble. That is what you would say about a horse. That is what I would say about a good marriage." He picked the glass up and did not drink from it. That is a separate matter. That is a thing men in my position do and have always done. And the entire county understands it, and every wife in that room tonight understands it, and I did not think I would have to explain it to you of all people. To me of all people. You've always been practical. There it was again. Charlotte felt her hands go cold at the fingertips. "I have been in this house for 12 years, she said. "I have run it. I have run the tenants, and the accounts, and the harvest sales, and the disputes, and the burials. When the fever came through in 1813, I nursed the Coleman children myself, because no doctor in this county would ride out to a tenant farm, and you were in Richmond for 6 weeks, and you never once asked what I had done. When your brother died and left that mess of debt, I sat in this room for 11 nights, and I found the way through it, and you told the colonel it was good fortune. It was good management, yours. I've never denied it. You've never said it. I did not think it required saying. It required saying, Charlotte said every single day for 12 years. Nathaniel set the glass down, and now for the first time there was an edge in it, the faint, weary edge of a man being made to have a conversation he considers beneath him. "Do not make this dramatic." Something in her chest went quiet. Not loud. Quiet. She had expected, if she had ever let herself imagine this moment at all, that it would come with weeping, that she would beg, that she would list her services like a servant asking for wages, and he would be moved, and there would be an apology, and she would forgive him, because forgiving him was the thing she had always done. Instead, she stood in the middle of her husband's study at 3 in the morning and felt something in her simply set down what it had been carrying. The way a woman who has carried a pail up a long hill finally reaches the top and puts it on the ground and finds that her arms will not stop shaking. "Dramatic," she repeated. "You're tired. It was a long evening. In the morning, I am not tired." She looked at him. "I am finished. Those are different things, and you have never once in 12 years been able to tell them apart. Charlotte, you said you paid for her." Her voice did not rise. "Nathaniel, look at me. You said you paid for her and not for me. Do you understand what you have told me? I told you that you have never wanted for anything. You told me," Charlotte said, "that in 12 years I have never once cost you anything you were unwilling to spend, which is true. I have been the cheapest thing in this house." He stood up then. Too late and for the wrong reason. "That is enough." "It is," she agreed, and she pulled the ring off her finger. It did not come easily. 12 years is long enough for a hand to grow around a thing. She had to work it over the knuckle, and she did it without hurrying, and Nathaniel Harrington stood behind his desk and watched her do it and did not say one word to stop her. She set it on the blotter. It made a small sound, very small. Charlotte, I spent 12 years proving I belonged in this house. She was looking at the ring, not at him. Every ledger, every dinner, every sick child on every tenant farm from here to the river. I thought that if I did enough of it one day, somebody would look up and say, "There she is, she's one of us, she's earned it." She raised her eyes. I forgot that I never needed anyone's permission to stand. You're not going anywhere at 3 in the morning. No, Charlotte said. I'm going at 6. Duh. She did not sleep. She went up to her room and she took the candle and she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap and she did not cry, and that surprised her more than anything else in the whole night. 12 years. She had thought there would be more to take. There was a small trunk in the corner that had come with her from her father's house in 1805. She filled it. 2 dresses, the gray and the brown. Her mother's shawl, a pair of shoes. The letters her father had written her the year before he died, tied with string which she had read so many times the folds had gone soft as cloth, and the small locked box from the bottom of the wardrobe. She sat with that on her knees for a long time before she opened it. $412 in coin and notes, her own. Not the allowance had gone into the household from the first year, and everyone in that house had eaten off it without ever knowing. This was different. This was 12 years of small sums, egg money, the linen she had sold to the Ashfords when they refurnished, the $40 her aunt had left her in 1809. Every quarter she had put something away, never much, never enough to notice, and she had never once let herself think about why she was doing it. She had told herself it was prudence. Sitting on the bed at 4 in the morning with her hand flat on the coins, Charlotte Harrington understood that some part of her had been packing this trunk for 12 years. She closed the box. Then she went down the back stairs in the dark, and she did the thing she would afterward be proudest of. She left the ledgers open. Not hidden, not spoiled. Open on the ledger room table, every book laid out in order, with a sheet of paper on top in her own hand. Quarterly rents due 1st of March. Coleman family remit. Half the boy is still lame. Whitfield note comes due in June. The north fence has been down since October. Elias has asked 4 times. Mrs. Ashford will not eat pork. She wrote it all out. 2 full pages. Everything she had carried in her head for 12 years set down plain so that no tenant would go hungry and no account would fall into ruin because of what she was about to do. She signed it, C. Harrington, and she never signed that name again. So, Elias was in the yard at 5 because Elias was always in the yard at 5. He looked at the trunk. He looked at her face. He did not ask. "Where to, ma'am?" "Millbrook." His hands stopped on the harness. "That's near 40 Mile. I know how far it is." "Ma'am?" He was not a young man. He had been at Harrington Estate since before Nathaniel was born, and he had never in 11 years said one word to her that was not respectful and brief. Does he know? He knows. Elias stood there a moment. Then he tipped his hat back and rubbed his forehead and said quiet, "My daughter had that fever in 13. I remember. I know you do." He picked up the trunk. "I'll drive you myself. Don't argue with me about it." She did not argue with him about it. The wagon was in the drive at 10 minutes before 6. Charlotte was up on the seat with her hands folded when the front door opened. Nathaniel came out onto the steps in his shirt sleeves, no coat hair, not combed. She had never in 12 years seen him outside that door less than perfectly dressed. "Charlotte?" She looked at him. "Come inside." "No. You've made your point. Come inside and we'll speak about it properly." "I made my point at 3 o'clock this morning," she said. "You told me to stop being dramatic." He came down 2 steps. You have nowhere to go. That's true. You have no Charlotte, be reasonable. You have no income of your own. You have no family living. You have no house. Where do you imagine you are going to sleep tonight? I don't know. Then what in God's name do you think you're doing? And Charlotte Harrington, 41 years old, sitting on the seat of a wagon in the gray light, with everything she owned in one trunk behind her, looked down at her husband and said, "Finding out." He stared at her. "You'll be back inside a month," he said. "I might be." "You will. You have no idea what it is out there for a woman alone. You have never once in your life had to—" Nathaniel. She said his name gently. That was the thing that stopped him. "I have run this estate for 12 years, every acre of it, every soul on it, and you have just stood on those steps and told me I don't know what it is to work." His mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "That's the whole of it," she said. "That was always the whole of it." She turned to Elias. "Drive on." The wagon moved. She did not turn around. She had decided that before she came down the stairs, that whatever else happened, whatever it cost, she would not turn around, and she held to it all the way down the long drive and out between the gateposts and onto the Richmond Road. Behind her on the steps, Nathaniel Harrington watched the wagon until it was out of sight, and then he went back into the house, and he was entirely calm, because he did not believe for one moment that she was gone. He believed she would be back by Sunday. He was a man who had never in his life wanted anything he could not have, and he had no framework, no experience, no single memory to draw on that would let him understand what had just happened in his own driveway. So he had breakfast, and at 9 o'clock he walked into the ledger room to look for a paper and found every book on the estate laid open on the table with 2 pages of a woman's handwriting on top of them. He read the first line, "Quarterly rents due 1st March." He read the second, "Coleman family remit, half the boy is still lame." And Nathaniel Harrington sat down slowly in the chair his wife had sat in for 11 nights the winter his brother died, and he read all 2 pages, and then he read them again, and somewhere near the bottom of the second page, he came to a line that said, "The north fence has been down since October." Elias has asked 4 times, and he realized that he did not know there was a north fence. 40 miles is a long way in a farm wagon. They stopped once at midday at a crossroads where a woman sold bread out of a basket. Charlotte bought 2 loaves and gave one to Elias, and they ate sitting on the tailboard without saying much. "Ma'am," he said eventually, "can I say a thing? You can say anything you like. I'm not your mistress anymore. You was never that." He turned the bread over in his hands. 12 year I been driving that road. In 12 year I never once seen you sit down at your own table. Not once. You'd stand by the wall till the last plate went out, and then you'd go down to the kitchen and eat standing up. Charlotte looked at him. "You noticed that?" "Everybody in that house noticed that," Elias said. "Wasn't nobody in that house didn't notice that." He put the bread down. "Just weren't none of us in a position to say." They came into Millbrook a little after 5. It was not much of a place. A church, a mill, a general store, 2 streets that met at a right angle and thought better of it. Charlotte had been there exactly once, 9 years earlier, on some errand about a landline. She had chosen it for one reason, and she was honest with herself about the reason. It was 40 miles from Harrington Estate, and there was not one living soul in it who had ever heard the name Harrington spoken with any particular weight. Elias pulled up outside the boarding house. This is it. He carried the trunk in and set it down inside the door, and then he stood there turning his hat over in his hands. "He'll come after you." "I know. Not right off. He'll wait. He'll wait till he's sure it don't look like he's chasing." Elias's mouth moved. "But he'll come." "I know that too." "What'll you tell him?" Charlotte thought about it. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'd like to be somebody worth answering by the time he gets here." Elias put his hat on. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something he had never done in 11 years. He put out his hand, and she took it, and he shook her hand like a man shaking hands with another man on the closing of a fair piece of business. "Ma'am," he said, "it's been an honor." Then he got up on the wagon and drove home to tell them all that she was gone. The landlady's name was Mrs. Doyle. She was 60, she was a widow, and she had a face like a closed door. "Room's $1.50 the week. Meals is separate. No drink, no callers past 8, and I don't take nobody I can't get a name from. Charlotte Whitmore." Mrs. Doyle's pen stopped. "Whitmore. That's right. That a married name or a maiden name?" Charlotte looked at the pen, then at the woman holding it. "It's mine," she said. Mrs. Doyle looked back at her a long, flat, entirely unsentimental look. The look of a woman who had run a boarding house in a small town for 20 years and had seen every kind of person come through that door with a trunk and a story. Then she wrote it down. "Room's at the top of the stairs," she said. "Water's in the pitcher. Supper's at 6, and I don't hold it for nobody. Thank you. Miss Whitmore." Charlotte was 3 steps up when the woman spoke again. "That trunk's mighty light for a woman starting over." Charlotte's hand tightened on the rail. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "It is." "Well." Mrs. Doyle closed the book. "Everything I ever had come out of a trunk that light." The room was small and clean, and the window faced west. Charlotte set the trunk down. She took off her bonnet. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap in exactly the way she had sat 16 hours earlier, and 400 and some miles of memory ago, and she waited to feel afraid. She waited a long time. What came instead was so strange that she said it out loud alone in a rented room in a town where nobody knew her name. "Nobody knows where I am." She heard herself say it, then she said it again differently. "Nobody knows where I am." 12 years. 12 years in which every hour of her life had been accounted for by somebody, where she was standing, what she was arranging, whose problem she was solving, whose oysters were late. 12 years in which she had not had one single hour that belonged to her. And now there was a whole evening. A whole evening in a room with a window facing west, and not one living person in the world who required a thing of her. Charlotte Whitmore put her face in her hands. And then at last, not in the study, not in the wagon, not on the long road, but in a plain room over a boarding house in Millbrook, Virginia, in the winter of 1817, she cried. She cried for about 4 minutes. Then she washed her face in the water from the pitcher, and she went down to supper because Mrs. Doyle did not hold it for nobody. There were 5 at the table. A drover, a young man who clerked at the store, 2 sisters in their 50s, the Mrs. Pryor, who taught nothing and sewed for the town, and Charlotte. The Pryors talked, mostly to each other. And I said to her, "Well, if the man won't pay, he won't pay," and she said she'd take it to the magistrate. And I said, "Ruth Coles, you will take nothing to no magistrate. You cannot even read what he'd put in front of you." She can read a little. She can read bills. She cannot read a paper a lawyer wrote, and neither can I, and neither can you, and that's the truth of this whole town. The younger sister sniffed. "It ain't right. Grown women, and not a one of us could tell if a paper was cheating us or not. It ain't right, and it ain't gonna change." Charlotte put down her fork. She had not intended to speak. She had intended to eat her supper and go up the stairs and be nobody for as long as she could manage it. "What kind of paper?" The table looked at her. "Beg pardon?" "The paper Mrs. Coles was given. Was it a note of hand, or a lease, or a bill of sale?" The elder Miss Pryor blinked. "Well, I don't rightly know the difference." "There's a great deal of difference," Charlotte said. "A note of hand can be assigned to a third party without telling her. A lease can't. If she's got a lease with a holdover clause in it, and she's been paying rent past the term, she may be in a stronger position than the man who wrote it, and he may be counting on her not knowing that." Silence around the table. The drover put down his knife. "You a lawyer's wife," he said. Charlotte considered the question for a moment. "No," she said. "I'm not anybody's wife." She picked her fork back up. "But I've read about 400 of those papers." she said, "and I could tell you inside of 2 minutes which one that woman's got." The elder Miss Pryor leaned forward slowly and put both elbows on the table and said, "Miss, what did you say your name was?" "Whitmore," said Charlotte. "Charlotte Whitmore." "Well, Miss Whitmore." The old woman's eyes had gone bright and sharp and something like hungry. "Ruth Coles lives at the end of Mill Street in the house with the blue door, and she has got that paper in a tin on her mantel, and she has been crying over it for 3 weeks." Charlotte set down her fork a second time. Outside the window, the light was going, and 40 miles east, her husband was sitting in a room with 2 pages of her handwriting in front of him, learning for the first time in his life the true and exact price of a woman he had gotten for nothing. "Then I'll call on her in the morning," said Charlotte Whitmore. And she called on her at 8 o'clock before the town was properly awake, because Charlotte Whitmore had spent 12 years learning that the hour before people are ready for you is the hour you find out the truth. The house at the end of Mill Street had a blue door and a broken step. A woman answered with flour to her elbows and a look on her face that said she had already decided the day was going to be bad. "I don't want nothing. I'm not selling anything." "Then what?" "My name is Charlotte Whitmore. I board at Mrs. Doyle's. The Mrs. Pryor told me you've got a paper in a tin on your mantel that's been keeping you up nights." Charlotte let that sit for 1 beat. "I'd like to read it." Ruth Coles did not move out of the doorway. "Why?" "Because I can. Everybody in this town can read." "Not this," Charlotte said. "This isn't reading. This is knowing what's been left out." Something went across the woman's face. Suspicion first. Then underneath it, the thing Charlotte had come for, the raw, exhausted hope of a person who has been carrying something alone for 3 weeks and has just been offered a hand. Ruth Coles stepped back from the door. The tin was where the Pryors had said it would be. The paper inside had been folded and unfolded so many times it had gone soft at the creases, and Charlotte knew that softness. She had a bundle of letters in her trunk with folds exactly like it. She read it standing at the mantel. It took her 90 seconds. Then she read it again slower, and this time her finger stopped halfway down the second paragraph and stayed there. Ruth was watching her hands. "Well, who wrote this?" "Mr. Harlan Beck. He's got the mill and about half the paper in this town." Ruth's voice went flat. "He says I owe him $91, and the house comes to him at the end of the month." "And do you owe him $91? "I owe him something. My husband borrowed 40 from him in 15 for seed, and then he died in the spring, and Beck says with the interest it's 91. Her chin came up. "I ain't disputing a debt I owe." "Good," Charlotte said, "because you owe him $52.90 and he cannot take this house." The kitchen went very quiet. "Say that again." $52.90. Charlotte turned the paper around and held it up. "This isn't a mortgage. He's written it like one, and he's counting on you believing it is one, but it's a note of hand with a house named in it as surety, and that's not the same thing. Not in this state. To take the house, he'd have to go to the county court and get judgment, and to get judgment, he'd have to show his figures, and his figures are wrong." "Wrong how?" "He's compounding the interest quarterly. The note says annually." Charlotte tapped the line. "Right there. He wrote it himself. He's been charging you 4 times a year on a paper that says once for 2 years, and I doubt very much he thought a widow on Mill Street would ever have anybody sit down and work it." Ruth Coles took the paper. She looked at it. She looked at the line Charlotte's finger had been on. She could read it. She could read it perfectly well. That was the terrible part. The words had been sitting in her house for 2 years, and she had read them 100 times, and they had meant nothing at all. 2 years, she said. 2 years. He come to church. He sat behind me in church every Sunday of them 2 years. Yes. Ruth's hand started to shake. She put the paper down on the table very carefully, the way you put down something you are afraid of breaking or afraid of throwing. "What do I do?" "You do nothing," Charlotte said. "You give me a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll write out the figures every quarter both ways, the way he did it and the way the note says, and you'll copy it in your own hand because it needs to be your hand. Then you'll take it to him, and you'll set it on his desk, and you'll say one thing, and only one thing. What's that? That you'd like to settle at $52.90, and that if he'd rather have the court work the sum, you're content to let them. He'll laugh at me. He might. He'll say a woman don't understand a note. Charlotte looked at her. Then let him say it, she said, with the figures in front of him. By 9 the next morning, half of Millbrook knew. By noon, the other half had heard it wrong, that a lawyer's widow had come up from Richmond, that a woman had gone into Harlan Beck's office and made him white in the face, that Ruth Coles had paid $52.90 and walked out with a receipt and had cried in the street. The last part was true. The rest of it did not matter. What mattered was that on Thursday afternoon there was a knock at Mrs. Doyle's front door, and when Charlotte came down the stairs, there were 3 women standing in the hall with papers in their hands. By the following Thursday, there were 9. Mrs. Doyle stood in her own hallway with her arms crossed and watched them come. And on the second Thursday she said, "Miss Whitmore, a word." "Yes, ma'am." "I run a boarding house, not a courthouse." "I know it." 9 women through my front hall in one afternoon, tracking mud. "I'll speak to them about the mud. Don't be smart with me." Mrs. Doyle uncrossed her arms. "The back room's got a stove in it and a table, and it ain't been used since my husband died. You can have it Tuesdays and Thursdays, $2 the month." Charlotte started to speak. "And I'll be sitting in the corner," Mrs. Doyle said, "because half these women can't tell you what year they were born, and somebody's got to write it down." 40 miles east, Nathaniel Harrington was learning what a north fence was. He learned it standing in a field in the rain on the 4th of March with Elias beside him and a tenant named Josiah Coleman on the other side of a gap you could have driven a wagon through, and Coleman was not being respectful, and Nathaniel did not have the first idea what to do about it. 4 times, Coleman said. 4 times I sent word. To whom? To the house, to the mistress. She'd have had it up inside a fortnight. Coleman spat. She always did. Mrs. Harrington is away. I know she's away. Coleman's eyes came up. Whole county knows she's away. My cattle been in the Ashford corn twice, and Ashford's talking about the magistrate, and I got no wife to send to the house no more, do I? Because she's gone and the fence is still down, and I'm asking you, sir, what do you aim to do about it? There had been perhaps 4 moments in Nathaniel Harrington's life when a man of a lower station had spoken to him like that. He opened his mouth to say the thing he had always said, the thing that ended conversations. And it was not there. He stood in the rain and could not find it because the thing he had always said was, "Speak to Mrs. Harrington." And he had been saying it for 12 years without once hearing himself do it. "I'll have it up by Saturday," he said. Coleman stared at him. "You will. I said I will." Riding back, Elias did not speak until they were through the gate. "That was a start," he said. Nathaniel did not answer for 100 yards. Then, "How long has she been doing that?" "Doing what, sir?" "Standing in fields in the rain, being told she's failed." Elias looked straight ahead. 12 years, he said, give or take. The letter came to Millbrook on the 22nd of March. Mrs. Doyle brought it up herself and stood in the doorway while Charlotte turned it over and saw the seal. "That his—" "Yes." "You going to open it?" "Not yet." "Suit yourself." Mrs. Doyle did not leave. "My husband wrote me a letter once, after. Took me 9 days to open it, and it wasn't worth the 9 days." "What did it say?" "Said he was sorry and would I send his good coat." Charlotte laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. A short, surprised bark of a laugh, and it was the first time she had laughed out loud in 6 weeks. She opened the letter that night. Charlotte. "I trust this finds you well and in respectable lodging. I have not written before now as I judged it better to allow the matter to settle. The estate proceeds satisfactorily. I have engaged a man from Richmond to see to the accounts. There has been some confusion regarding the quarterly rents, but it is being addressed. I do not propose to discuss what was said in February. I said a thing in a manner I might have chosen better, and you took it in a way I did not intend, and I think we are both sensible enough to let it lie. Your rooms are as you left them. Mrs. Ashford has asked after you twice. When you are ready to come home, write, and I will send the carriage. N. Harrington. Charlotte read it 3 times. Then she folded it and put it in the trunk, and she sat for a while with her hands flat on her knees. I said a thing in a manner I might have chosen better. Not I was wrong, not I paid for her, not you and I have thought about those words every night since. A manner I might have chosen better. And underneath it, unwritten, but so loud she could hear it in his voice, when you are ready to stop this. She got up and got the pen. Nathaniel. I am well. The lodging is respectable. I did not take your words in a way you did not intend. I took them exactly as you meant them, which is why I left. Do not send the carriage. C. Whitmore. She looked at the signature for a long moment before she folded it. Then she sent it. Boy. It reached Harrington Estate on the 28th, and Nathaniel read it standing in the hall, and he read the last line twice. C. Whitmore. He went into the study and closed the door and did not come out for 2 hours. When he came out, he sent for Elias. Millbrook, he said. What's in it? Sir. You drove her there. What's in it? Elias considered. A church, he said. A mill. A store. That's all. That's all that was in it in February. Elias said, Sir. What was in it by April was this. There was a back room at Mrs. Doyle's with a stove and a table, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays there were between 6 and 20 women in it, and a ledger that Mrs. Doyle kept in her own hand with every name in it, and on the wall a sheet of paper with 3 lines written on it in Charlotte's writing. A paper you cannot read can still be read to you. A figure you cannot work can still be worked. Nobody in this room needs permission to stand. There was Ruth Coles, who had gone from crying in the street to sitting at the end of the table twice a week, explaining to new women what a note of hand was, because she had learned it, and she would be damned if she'd let anybody else learn it the way she had. There was a girl of 15 named Sari, who came from 4 miles out, and who could not read at all, and who was now on the 6th page of a primer the Mrs. Pryor had dug out of a cupboard. And there was the problem of Harlan Beck, because Harlan Beck owned the mill and half the paper in that town, and he had lost $38.10, and a great deal more than that in front of witnesses, and Harlan Beck had a long memory. He came on the 4th Thursday in April. He came in the front door without knocking, and walked down the hall into the back room while there were 11 women in it, and he took his hat off, which was worse than if he had not. Afternoon, ladies. Nobody answered him. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Beck. I hear you've been reading papers. He was perfectly pleasant. That was his method, and it had worked on that town for 20 years. I hear you've been reading a good many papers. I have. Free of charge. Yes, that's generous. He turned his hat in his hands. Now I'm a plain man, so I'll say a plain thing. I got no quarrel with a woman being helpful. But there's men in this town holding paper in good faith, and they don't much care to have a stranger come in and tell folks their paper's no good. I've never told anyone their paper was no good, Charlotte said. I've told them what it says. Same thing, ain't it? No, sir, it's the exact opposite. Beck smiled. Ruth Coles, he said. That was a mistake in the figuring. Happens. Twice a year for 2 years. Happens. Then it'll be no trouble for you to open your book, Charlotte said, and let us see how often it's happened to the others. 11 women looked at Harlan Beck. He put his hat back on. Miss Whitmore, he said, still pleasant. You're new here, so you won't know that Mrs. Doyle's got a note on this house. $62 wrote in 14. I hold it. The room went absolutely still. Charlotte did not look at Mrs. Doyle. That was the hardest thing she did that year. She kept her eyes on Beck, and she did not look at the woman in the corner with the ledger, because if she looked, he would know it had landed. Is that a threat, Mr. Beck? That's a fact. I don't deal in threats. He went to the door. "Ladies?" He was 3 steps down the hall when Mrs. Doyle spoke. "Harlan?" He stopped. $62 wrote in 14. Mrs. Doyle stood up. She was 60 years old and 4 foot 11 inches, and she had not raised her voice. "You want to call it, call it. Go on down to the courthouse this afternoon and call it. And while you're stood there in front of Judge Wells, you can explain to him why you called a widow's note the same week 11 women in this town sat down to check your figures." Beck did not turn around. "That's how it'll look," Mrs. Doyle said. "Because that's what it is." The front door closed. Nobody in the back room said anything for a good 10 seconds. Then the elder Miss Pryor said into the silence, "Well, I never in my life." And 11 women started talking at once. Charlotte crossed the room and sat down in the chair next to Mrs. Doyle and said low, "How much of that note is still standing?" "All of it. All 62. I've been paying the interest 12 years, Mrs. Doyle said. "Never once touched the principal. Didn't know you could." Charlotte closed her eyes for a second. "Get me the paper," she said. It took 11 days. It took 11 days because the paper was worse than Ruth Coles's paper, and because Mrs. Doyle's late husband had signed a second note in 16 that she had not known about, and because on the 4th day, Charlotte found a line in it that made her put her pen down and sit back and say a word out loud that she had not said since she was 19. On the 12th day, she walked into Harlan Beck's office with a folder under her arm and did not sit down. "I'd like to settle Mrs. Doyle's account." "That's so." "Yes, sir. I've worked the figures." She set the folder on his desk. "By your book, she owes $62 principal and 11 years of interest, and you've never once given her a receipt showing what was principal and what was interest, which is the only reason she thought she was getting nowhere. Sounds about right?" "By her payments," Charlotte said. "She has overpaid you $19.40. Beck's face did not change. "That's a serious thing to say." "It's a serious thing to have done." She opened the folder. "Every payment's in your own book, Mr. Beck. I've not invented a figure. I copied yours." "You've been in my book." Mrs. Doyle asked the clerk for her own account, which she is entitled to, and the clerk gave it to her because it never occurred to him she'd know what to do with it. Charlotte let that sit. She didn't, but I did. Harlan Beck looked at the folder for a long time. Then he did the thing that surprised her. He laughed. Not pleasantly, but real. 20 years, he said. 20 years I run paper in this town, and not one soul ever asked me for a column of figures. I know. Not one. He rubbed his face. You know what you've done? You've not cost me $19. You've cost me every note in this county because come Sunday, every woman on Mill Street's going to want her account read out, and half of them ain't going to like what they hear, and the other half's going to find out I've been straight with them, and it won't matter, because they'll never take my word for a figure again long as I live. Yes, Charlotte said. That's about the size of it. Who are you? She had been asked that 4 times since February. She had a different answer every time, and none of them had been true. I'm a woman who kept a set of books for 12 years, she said, and never once got her name in them. Beck looked at her. Then he took out his pen and wrote out a receipt for Mrs. Doyle's note marked "Satisfied in full" and pushed it across the desk. 1940, he said. I'll bring it Friday. I'd rather bring it than have you come get it. That's wise of you. Miss Whitmore. He was not smiling now. There's a man been asking after you. Come through Tuesday. Put up at the tavern. Asked the ostler what kind of woman it was reading papers in the back of Doyle's boarding house. Charlotte's hand stopped on the folder. What sort of man? Gentleman's servant. Good coat, better horse. Beck watched her face. Didn't give a name. Give a coin, though. $2 for talk. What did the ostler tell him? Told him the truth, Beck said. Told him there's a woman in this town went through my book and come out the other side with a receipt, and that if his master's got business here, he'd best bring his figures in order. Nathaniel received that report on the 2nd of May in his study standing up. He read it twice. Then he set it down and stood with both hands flat on the desk for a long while. Went through his book. Come out the other side with a receipt. He knew that. He knew that woman. He had watched her do it in this room for 11 nights the winter Robert died, and at the end of the 11th night, she had come out with a way through, and he had gone down to the colonel and said the words, "Good fortune." He had said it lightly. He remembered saying it lightly. He remembered that she had been standing in the doorway when he said it, and that he had not thought about that for 4 years, and had now thought about it every day for 2 months. He rang for Elias. "Get the carriage." "Sir?" "Millbrook." Elias did not move. "Sir, may I say a thing?" "You've said a great many things lately." "Yes, sir." Elias stood his ground. "If you go up there in that carriage and you drive down that street, every soul in that town is going to see it, and they're going to know what it is inside of an hour. And whatever she's built up there, and by what I hear, she's built something, you'll have put your name on it before she's done." Nathaniel turned around. "You think I mean to take it from her?" "I think you mean to fetch her, sir," Elias said. "And I think there's a difference, and I think you don't know what it is yet." The silence went on long enough to be dangerous. "Then what would you have me do?" "Wait." "For how long?" "Till you've got a reason to go that ain't about you." He waited 5 weeks. He waited 5 weeks, and in those 5 weeks, he did 4 things that no Harrington had ever done. He put up the north fence himself badly, with Coleman standing over him, telling him he had the posts too shallow. He opened every ledger in the house and worked the rents for the first time in his life, and found that he was $14 out on the Coleman account in the tenant's favor, and wrote out and paid it, and Coleman looked at the money in his hand like it was a snake. He wrote to Victoria Blake and ended it in 4 lines and did not soften them, and he stood in front of 30 people at the Ashford Spring dinner with a glass in his hand, and the whole county listening, and heard Colonel Pemberton say, "And how does the estate go on, Harrington, without your good lady to see to it?" and heard the laugh that went round the table, and did not laugh with it. "Badly," he said. The laugh stopped. "I beg pardon." "Badly," Nathaniel said again. "The fence was down 5 months. I lost the Ashford corn twice over. I am $14 in arrears to a tenant who has been carrying it since November, and I did not know the North Field existed." He set the glass down. "For 12 years this county has come to my table and told me I keep a fine estate. I have never kept it, not one day of it. My wife kept it, and I let every one of you believe otherwise, and I let her believe I didn't notice." Nobody spoke. "She has left," he said, "and I would be obliged if this county stopped saying she has gone off, or gone to her people, or gone away to rest. She has left. She left because of a thing I said to her in my own study, and I will not repeat it here, and I would not repeat it anywhere, because there is no room in Virginia I could say it in, and still call myself a gentleman." Mrs. Ashford put down her fork. "Nathaniel," she said, "sit down." "Ma'am." "Sit down, boy." She said it the way she might have said it to him at 11 years old. Then to the table, "The rest of you can shut your mouths. I have known that woman 4 years, and she never once forgot I cannot abide lilies, and not one of you ever asked her a single question about herself in your lives." And that was the first time in 12 years that anybody in that county had defended Charlotte Harrington out loud. Right. Word travels 40 miles slower than it travels 4, but it travels. It reached Millbrook in the 2nd week of June, through a peddler, through the tavern, through Mrs. Doyle's kitchen door. Ruth Coles brought it up the stairs. "There's a thing being said. There's always a thing being said. About your husband." Charlotte's pen kept moving. "I don't have a husband. About Mr. Harrington, then." Ruth sat down on the edge of the bed uninvited because they were long past invitations. "They say he stood up in front of 30 people at a supper and told them he never ran his own estate, said his wife ran it, said it out loud with the whole county sat there." The pen stopped. "Who says?" "Peddler. Come through from Richmond. He had it off a girl who had it off a footman. Ruth watched her. Might be nothing. Might be. Charlotte, it's a story that's been through 4 mouths. It's a story that's been through 4 mouths, Ruth agreed, and every one of them mouths had no reason to invent it. Charlotte set the pen down. She had built 4 months out of not needing him to say it. That was the whole foundation. Every morning since February, she had gotten up in that room and gone down those stairs on the strength of one simple fact that whatever she was building it without one word of his help and without one word of his praise, and she would never need either again. And now he had said it, out loud, to 30 people, with nothing to gain by it. She found that her hands were unsteady, and she was very angry about that. "It doesn't change anything," she said. "No," Ruth said. "But it ain't nothing either." He came on the 19th of June. He came on horseback alone, no carriage, no servant in a plain coat, and he did not stop at the tavern, and he did not ask the ostler anything. He rode down to the boarding house and got off his horse in the street and stood there like a man who had run out of road. Mrs. Doyle got to the door before Charlotte did. "We're full." "I don't want a room." "Then you don't want nothing I've got. I'm here to see my wife." "There's no wife here." Mrs. Doyle stood square in the doorway. "There's a Miss Whitmore takes the back room Tuesdays and Thursdays and pays her board on the 1st of the month and don't owe a soul in this town a penny. You want her, you can wait in the street till she says otherwise." Nathaniel Harrington looked at that door. 4 months ago he would have gone through it. He took his hat off instead. "Then I'll wait in the street," he said. And he did for an hour and 10 minutes in the road in June, in front of a boarding house, in a town where nobody knew him, while women went past with baskets and looked at him and did not lower their eyes. At the end of the hour and 10 minutes, the door opened. Charlotte came out onto the step and stood there with her hands at her sides and looked at her husband for the first time in 4 months. He had lost weight. His boots were dusty to the knee. And there was something in his face she had never seen there in 12 years and could not for a moment put a name to until she did, and the name of it was fear. "Charlotte, you've been standing a long time." "Yes." "Why?" Nathaniel Harrington turned his hat over once in his hands. "Because," he said, "I could not think of a single reason on God's earth why anybody in that house ought to let me in." Charlotte did not answer him for a long moment, and when she did, she said only, "Then you'd better come round the side. Mrs. Doyle won't have you in the front hall, and I won't ask her to." He followed her round the side of the house to the yard, and she did not offer him a chair, and he did not sit. "You look well," he said. "I am well." "You look—" He stopped, started again. "Different." "I'm not different. You're only looking." That landed. She saw it land. He turned his hat over in his hands again the way he had in the street, and she found it strange to watch a man who had never in his life fidgeted learn how to do it at 41. "I got your letter," he said. "You got 2 of them. You answered neither." "I answered the first. You sent a carriage schedule." "Charlotte, you wrote that you had said a thing in a manner you might have chosen better." She kept her voice even. "Nathaniel, you did not choose the manner badly. You chose the words exactly. I paid for her, not you. There's no better manner for that sentence. There's only not saying it." He did not defend himself. That was the first thing that unsettled her. 12 years of marriage, and he had never once let a charge stand without shaving something off it. Now he stood in Mrs. Doyle's yard and took it whole. "I know," he said. "You know. I've had 4 months to know it." He looked at the ground, then back up. "I'd have come sooner. Elias told me not to." "Elias told you not to." "He said I'd be coming to fetch you, and that there was a difference between fetching and something else, and that I didn't know what the difference was yet." A muscle went in his jaw. He was right. I didn't. "And do you now?" "I think so." "Then say it." Nathaniel Harrington took a breath. "I came because I wanted to see the thing you built," he said. "Not to bring it home, just to see it. Because I lived beside you for 12 years while you built one, and I never once looked at it, and I have got no right to see this one, and I came anyway." Charlotte's hands were at her sides, and she made herself keep them there. "That's a good speech." "It isn't a speech." "It's a very good speech, Nathaniel. You've had 4 months and 40 miles to write it." "I've had 4 months and 40 miles to fail to write it," he said, and something raw came up under his voice for the first time. "I wrote 9 letters. I burned all 9. Every one of them read like a man explaining himself, and I have been explaining myself to you since February in my own head, and there is no explanation. There's only the thing I said, and the 12 years before it." The yard was quiet. Charlotte heard through the wall Mrs. Doyle setting a pot down harder than a pot needed to be set down. "How long are you in Millbrook?" "As long as you'll let me be." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got. I've taken a room at the tavern, paid for the week." He hesitated. "I didn't give my name." "Why not?" "Because the last time I gave my name in a town, he said it did all the work, and I have started to think that's been the trouble with my whole life."
Hamag.
She did not sleep that night either. She lay in the room with the window facing west, and she was furious not at him, which would have been simple, but at herself because some small traitorous thing under her ribs had heard I came to see the thing you built and had gone warm, and she had spent 4 months teaching that thing not to. At 2 in the morning, she got up and lit the candle and got out the trunk. She did not know why, until her hand found the bundle of her father's letters, and then she did. Her father had written to her every week the year before he died, and every letter had ended the same way. "Your affectionate father, J. Whitmore." And in the last one, written 11 days before the fever took him in, a hand gone shaky, he had added one line underneath. "Charlotte, do not let them make you small in exchange for keeping you." She had been 24 when she read that. She had been married 8 months. And she had folded it up and put it in a box and had understood it that night in 1806, exactly as well as she understood it now, and had done the opposite for 12 years anyway. She put the letters back. "Well," she said out loud to nobody, "you warned me." He was in the street at 7 the next morning, not at the door, in the street across from it, standing beside his horse waiting. Ruth Coles saw him on her way to the back room and came up the stairs 3 at a time. "He's out there." "I know. He's been out there since before I come. The ostler's boy says, since 6. Ruth's face was doing something complicated. "Charlotte, what does he want?" "He says he wants to see." "See what?" "Us," Charlotte said. "This." Ruth went to the window and looked down at him for a long moment. "Let him," she said. "Ruth, no, listen to me." Ruth turned around. "I sat at that table 3 weeks crying over a paper because a man told me what it said, and I believed him, and you come in my kitchen and told me the truth of it in 90 seconds. That's what's in that back room. That's the whole of it." Her chin came up. "So let him sit in the corner and watch it, and if he can sit through 2 hours of it without opening his mouth once, then maybe he's worth the 4 months you spent not crying about him." Charlotte stared at her. "I never said I didn't cry." "You never had to," Ruth said. He sat in the corner for 2 hours and 11 minutes. There were 14 women in that room that Thursday. He was the only man who had been in it since Harlan Beck walked out of it in April, and every woman there knew who he was inside of 10 minutes, because the elder Miss Pryor told the younger Miss Pryor in a whisper. You could have heard from the mill. Nathaniel Harrington sat with his hat on his knees and did not speak. He watched a woman named Alma Rook put a paper on the table and say her brother-in-law had told her she'd signed away her third of her mother's land. And he watched Charlotte read it and say, "You've signed away the rents for 4 years, not the land. He's counting on you never asking the difference." And he watched Alma Rook put both hands over her mouth. He watched a 15-year-old girl named Sari read a full page out loud badly slowly, with the whole room silent for her, and get to the end of it and look up. He watched 11 women applaud a child for reading a page. He watched his wife go round that table and know every name, every debt, every dead husband, every landlord, every figure without a book in front of her. And somewhere in the second hour, Nathaniel Harrington understood something that put a cold hand on the back of his neck. She was not doing anything here that she had not done at Harrington Estate. Not one thing. It was the same work, the same head for it, the same going round the table and knowing every name. She had done it for 12 years in his house for exactly nothing, and she was doing it here for exactly nothing. And the only difference in the whole world between the two was that these women knew she was doing it. That was it. That was the entire difference. He had not underpaid her. He had not overworked her. He had done a thing far worse and far cheaper than either. He had let her be invisible because it had never cost him a cent to let her be, and because the day anybody in that county said out loud that Charlotte ran the estate was the day Nathaniel Harrington stopped being the man who kept a fine estate. He had needed her to be invisible. He had needed it for 12 years, and he had never once had to admit that he needed it because she had never once asked. He got up and walked out of the room in the middle of Sary's second page. Charlotte found him in the yard 20 minutes later with his back against the fence and his hat in the dirt. You left. Yes. 14 women in that room noticed you leave. I know. Sary thought it was because of her reading. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Tell her it wasn't. Tell her yourself. He looked at her then, and Charlotte saw that his eyes were red, and she had never in 12 years seen that either. I can't go back in there, he said. Why? Because I sat in that room for 2 hours and I watched you do the exact thing you did in my house for 12 years. His voice had gone unsteady. The exact thing, Charlotte. Same work, same table. Same women coming to you because there's nobody else. And they know. Every one of them knows. That old woman with the ledger knows, that girl knows, they all know what you are, and it took them 4 months. Nathaniel, it took them 4 months, he said. It took me 12 years and I had to lose you to do it. Charlotte did not move. And you know what I keep coming back on? He pushed off the fence. It's not the necklace. God help me, it's not even the necklace. It's this. I have been sitting in that corner for 2 hours trying to remember one single time, one that I said your name in a room where it would have cost me something to say it. And there isn't one. Not one in 12 years. When it cost me nothing, I said you were practical. When it would have cost me, I said good management or good fortune or nothing at all. You said something at the Ashfords. You heard about that. Everything gets to Millbrook eventually. Then you know it was 4 months too late to be worth anything. It wasn't worth nothing, Charlotte said. That stopped him. You've been asked a question, she said, and you haven't heard it yet, so I'll ask it plain. Why did you never tell me? Tell you what? That you knew. Her voice did not rise, but something in it went very hard. Not that you were sorry, that you knew. You knew the estate was mine to run. You knew every account, every tenant, every sick child. You knew it the whole time you've just stood there and admitted you knew it. So why in 12 years did you never once say it to my face? Nathaniel opened his mouth, and nothing came. Say it. Because if I'd said it, he said, you might have stopped. The words came out of him before he could get in front of them, and she watched him hear them, and she watched his face come apart. That's the truth, he said. That's the truth, and I did not know it until this second. If I'd said, Charlotte, you are running this estate, and I am not, then you'd have known it too, out loud. And you might have asked what you were owed for it, and I'd have had to answer. Charlotte took a step back, not from fear, from the weight of it. So you kept me quiet, she said, by never saying a word. Yes. For 12 years. Yes. Because it was cheaper. Yes. Nathaniel Harrington said, and his voice broke on it. She walked away from him. She walked the length of the yard and stood with her back to him and her arms folded, and she did not trust herself to speak for a long time. And behind her, he had the sense not to fill the silence, which was the first entirely correct thing he had done in 4 months. When she turned around, her face was dry. You want to know the worst of it, she said. It isn't what you did. It's what I did. Charlotte, no. Don't. She held a hand up. Don't be generous with me. You haven't earned generous. Listen. She came back across the yard until she was 6 feet from him. I knew, all 12 years. Do you understand that I was not a fool? I knew what I was doing, and I knew nobody was going to say it, and I told myself a story every single night that if I did enough of it one day, it would be enough. One day somebody would look up and say her name. Charlotte. And every year the price went up, she said. That's what nobody tells you. The longer you go without asking, the more it would cost to ask. By year 8, I couldn't have asked you for a word of thanks without it sounding like I was making a scene about nothing, because 8 years of saying nothing had made it nothing. Her voice cracked once, and she put it back together. You didn't make me small, Nathaniel. You just left the door open, and I walked into it and pulled it shut behind me every day for 12 years and called it being good. Nathaniel stood very still. Then what do I do? He said. You want a task? I want a task, yes. I want something I can go and do. Of course you do. She laughed, and it had nothing kind in it. That's the whole of you. Give Nathaniel a thing to do, and he'll do it splendidly. Put up a fence, pay a tenant, stand up at the Ashford's table. Those are all doing, and you're very good at doing, and none of it cost you the one thing that actually costs. Which is what? Being the second most important person in the room, Charlotte said, and staying in it. He did not leave Millbrook. He stayed at the tavern. He paid another week. And on the following Tuesday he came back to the boarding house and did not go into the back room. He went round to the yard and asked Mrs. Doyle if there was work. Mrs. Doyle looked him up and down. Woodshed roof's got a hole in it. I'll see to it. You know how... No. Then that'll be entertaining, Mrs. Doyle said and went inside. He was up on that roof 4 hours. He did it badly. He came down with his hands torn and his coat off and shingles laid in a line, so crooked the younger Miss Pryor stood in the yard and laughed at it out loud. And Nathaniel Harrington took his hat off to her and said, Ma'am, I reckon you're not wrong. And that was the moment the town of Millbrook stopped calling him and started calling him the fella at Doyle's. He did the woodshed on Tuesday. He did the front gate on Wednesday. On Thursday, when the women came, he sat in the yard and did not come in. And at the end of it, Sari came out and stood in front of him with her primer. Miss Whitmore says you didn't leave on account of my reading. That's right, miss. Then why'd you leave? Nathaniel looked at the girl. 15. 4 miles walk each way, twice a week. Because I'd just found out I'd been unkind to somebody for a long time, he said, and I couldn't sit still with it. Sari considered this with great seriousness. You want to hear me read? She said. I'm on page 9. And that was how Charlotte Whitmore came out of the back room on the 26th of June and found her husband sitting on Mrs. Doyle's back step, listening to a 15-year-old sound out the word particular and correcting her twice and getting it wrong the second time himself. The letter from Richmond came on the 3rd of July. It came for Nathaniel, forwarded twice, and he read it standing in the tavern yard, and then he walked down to the boarding house, faster than he had walked anywhere in 4 months. Charlotte was at the table with Mrs. Doyle and the ledger. I have to go back. All right. Charlotte. He put the letter on the table. It's the Whitfield note. It came due in June. Everything in the room went still, because Charlotte Whitmore knew that note. She had written a line about it on the second page she had left open on a table in February. Whitfield note, comes due in June, and she had assumed the way you assume the sun that somebody would read it. You didn't pay it. The man from Richmond paid the interest. He didn't know about the principal. Nathaniel's face was gray. It's $1,100, Charlotte. Whitfield's put it to the county court. If I don't clear it by the 1st of September, he takes the west section that's 4 tenant farms. That's the Colemans. Mrs. Doyle got up quietly and left the room. Charlotte sat looking at the letter. You have $1,100. I have 400 and something and a harvest that isn't in. Then sell something. Sell what? The land's what he wants. He dragged a hand down his face. Charlotte, I have gone through those books 11 times, and I cannot find a way through this. I have sat in that study every night for a week, and I cannot see it. And there it was. Charlotte felt it come up in her chest with a force that frightened her, the old familiar terrible pull. Give me the books. I'll find it. I found it in 13. I can find it now. 11 nights and I'll find it. I always find it. 12 years of that. 12 years of being the woman who found it unpaid, unnamed, in a room nobody knew she was in. She put both hands flat on the table. No, she said. Nathaniel looked up. No, I'm not doing it. Charlotte, there are 4 families on that section. I know who's on that section. Her voice snapped for the first time in 4 months. I nursed the Coleman children through the fever in 13. I know the name of every child on that land and the year each one was born, and don't you dare stand in this room and tell me who's on it. He shut his mouth. I'm not doing it, she said again, and her hands were shaking, and she let them. Because if I do it the way I've always done it, if I take those books and sit in a room and find the way through and hand it to you and let you carry it out to the county, then in 10 years' time, somebody will ask you how you saved the West section, and you will say good management, and you will mean it, and you will not even know you've done it again. I would not. You would, Charlotte said. Not because you're wicked, because it's easier, and because you've had 41 years of easier, and because I would let you. That's the part. I would let you. I've been letting you since 1805. The room was silent. Then what do you want? Nathaniel said. Charlotte stood up. I want you to ask me properly, she said. I'm asking. You're not. You've come in here and told me a thing is broken, the way you've told me a thing is broken for 12 years and stood there waiting for it to be mended. She came round the table. So ask me properly. Out loud, in front of a witness, say the words. What words? You know what words. And Nathaniel Harrington stood in the kitchen of a boarding house in Millbrook, Virginia, with his hat in his hand and $1,100 of ruin in his coat pocket, and understood exactly what she was asking for, and understood that it was going to cost him the only thing he had ever refused to spend. He turned toward the door. Mrs. Doyle, he said. Ma'am? Would you come in here, please? She came. She had not gone far. Nathaniel looked at Charlotte. I can't save my own land, he said. I have been through the books 11 times, and I cannot see it, and my wife can, and she has always been able to. And every man in my county thinks I run that estate because I let them think it for 12 years. His voice was steady, and his hands were not. I am asking Charlotte Whitmore, who is better at this than I will ever be, to take this problem out of my hands, not to help me. To take it. And whatever comes of it, I will stand up in front of Whitfield and the court, and the whole of Virginia, and say whose work it was. Mrs. Doyle looked at him. Then she looked at Charlotte. Well, she said, that's the first honest thing anybody's said in my kitchen since my husband died. Charlotte did not move for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair. Sit down, she said, and put the letter where I can see it. He put the letter where she could see it, and then he sat down, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, Nathaniel Harrington waited on the other side of a table while his wife worked. She read it once through without saying anything. Then she turned it over and looked at the back, which was blank, and said, Where's the note itself? At the house. Then it's no good to me at the house. I'll send for it. You'll ride for it, Charlotte said. Tonight. And you'll bring the note and the counterpart if Whitfield gave you one, and every receipt for every payment made on it since it was written, and the ledger for 14 and 15, and the ledger for this year that your Richmond man's been keeping. Nathaniel had a hand on the table. That's 40 miles each way. Yes. Charlotte, it's near 5 o'clock. She looked up at him, and Nathaniel Harrington heard himself and stopped and got up out of the chair. I'll be back Friday, he said. He was back Thursday night at 11:30 with the papers in a saddlebag and his horse blown, and he stood in Mrs. Doyle's kitchen with the mud still on him, while Charlotte spread it all out on the table by candlelight. Mrs. Doyle came down in her wrapper. There is a man in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night. Yes, ma'am, Nathaniel said. There is. It's past 8. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Doyle looked at the table, at the papers, at Charlotte's face bent over them. I'll put the kettle on, she said. Charlotte worked until 3. She worked with the note flat in front of her and a sheet of foolscap at her elbow, and Nathaniel sat across from her and did not speak once. And at some point, after 1 o'clock, she said without looking up, "You can go to bed." "No. There's nothing for you to do." "There's this," he said. She did look up then. "There's what?" "Sitting here," Nathaniel said. "You did this alone for 11 nights when Robert died. I know because Elias told me. He said you were in that room till 3 every night, and you never once sent for anything. And every morning I came down and there was coffee and I never asked who made it." He folded his hands. "So I'm going to sit here till you're done. That's all it is. It's not help." Charlotte looked at him for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she went back to the page. At 2:20 she said, At 2:30 she said it again differently. At 2:50 she put the pen down, sat back and said, "Nathaniel, wake up." He had not been asleep. He had been sitting with his eyes shut and his jaw tight for 40 minutes. "What? When did Whitfield write this note?" 1814, March. "Who signed it?" "I did." "Read it to me." "Charlotte, read me the signature line, out loud." Nathaniel picked up the note and turned it to the candle and read, "Signed this 11th day of March, 1814. Robert Harrington for the estate of Harrington." The kitchen went silent. "Robert," Charlotte said. "That's Robert handled the Richmond business in 14. I was in Norfolk that spring. He signed a good deal of—" "Robert Harrington was not the owner of Harrington Estate in March of 1814, Charlotte said. "Your father died in 1811, and the whole of it came to you. Robert had an allowance and no more, and every soul in Richmond knew it, and Marcus Whitfield knew it better than anybody because he'd been carrying Robert's private debts since 1812. Nathaniel had gone completely still. "Say that again." "Whitfield lent $1,100 to a man who had no authority to pledge 1 acre of your land," Charlotte said, "and he wrote for the estate of Harrington on the paper himself. In his own hand. Look at it. Look at the ink. It's darker than the rest of the line. And he did it because Robert was into him for 400 already, and he wanted the whole of it sitting on land instead of on a dead man's word. You knew this. I knew Robert owed Whitfield. I found that in 15 when I went through his mess after the funeral." Her voice had gone very steady, which was how he had learned over 4 months to tell that she was furious. "I did not know he'd signed a note on the estate because that note was never in the house. It was at Richmond with Whitfield, and Whitfield was never going to bring it out while the interest was being paid quietly by a man who'd never opened a ledger in his life." 12 years, Nathaniel said. 3 years, Charlotte corrected. "It's only been sitting 3 years. The other 9 you managed to lose all on your own." He laughed. It came out of him wrong, half a sob. "Then it's void." "No. You just said—" "I said Robert had no authority. That doesn't make it void, it makes it arguable, and there's a world between those 2 words. She tapped the paper. "The estate has paid the interest on this note for 3 years, every quarter, which a court will say looks a great deal like the estate accepting the debt as its own." "Then we're where we started." "We are not where we started," Charlotte said, "because now we know that Marcus Whitfield has been sitting on a paper he knows is bad, and has never once in 3 years taken it to law, and he's taking it to law now in the same summer that half of Richmond has heard that Nathaniel Harrington cannot run his own estate." Nathaniel's head came up slowly. "He thinks I'm weak." "He knows you're weak," Charlotte said. "You stood up at the Ashfords' table and told 30 people you didn't know your own land had a north field. That was the bravest thing you ever did, and it was in every parlor in Richmond inside a fortnight, and Marcus Whitfield heard it and got out a paper he'd been afraid to use for 3 years. The candle went down another 1/4 inch. "So my one honest act," Nathaniel said, "is the thing that's going to cost the Colemans their farm." "Possibly." "Charlotte, you wanted the truth from me," she said. You don't get to pick which parts. She slept 4 hours and was at the table again at 8. Ruth Coles found her there with the note in front of her and a cold cup at her elbow. You didn't come to the back room. I know. 14 women, Charlotte. I know, Ruth. Ruth sat down across from her uninvited as always and looked at the papers and then at her face. It's his, ain't it? Yes. Then let him drown. Charlotte's hand stopped. Say that again. I said let him drown. Ruth's jaw was set. I've sat in that back room 5 months. I've watched you tell 20 women that a paper ain't worth crying over and that they don't owe nobody an explanation for standing up. And now, the man who told you to your face he paid for another woman and not for you rides in here with a bad debt and you're up at 3 in the morning saving him. I'm not saving him. Looks like it from where I'm sat. Ruth. Charlotte set the pen down. There are 4 families on that section. Josiah Coleman has 6 children. The youngest was born the spring I sat up with the other 5 through the fever, and they named her for me, and I have never once told anybody that because there was nobody in that house I could have told it to. Ruth's face changed. They named a child for you. 19 months old. Charlotte's voice did not waver. If Whitfield takes the west section, she's out on the road in September with a harvest she can't take with her. So no, I will not let him drown because he doesn't drown alone. That's the whole trouble with men like Nathaniel. They never drown alone. Ruth was quiet a moment. Then, what do you need? I need a lawyer who will stand up to Marcus Whitfield in a county court, and I've got about 11 days to find one. Beck knows every lawyer in 3 counties. Harlan Beck, Charlotte said, would sooner see me in a ditch. Harlan Beck, Ruth said, brought Mrs. Doyle $19.40 on a Friday because he was scared of what you'd do if he didn't. That ain't a man who wants you in a ditch. That's a man who's decided you're worth being on the right side of. Beck heard her out with his hands folded. When she was done, he sat back and said, You want me to find you a lawyer to fight Marcus Whitfield? Yes. Whitfield's got the Richmond bar in his pocket sideways. I know. And you're asking the man you took $19 off of in April. 57, Charlotte said. The 19 was Mrs. Doyle's. There were 3 others. Harlan Beck looked at her, and then his mouth moved, and he did the laugh again, the real one, the ugly one. You know what the funny thing is, he said. I've had 5 months to hate you, and I can't get it done. Every time I try, I think about my mother. He rubbed his jaw. She had a paper. In '98, man in Petersburg. Nobody read it to her. She lost the house and she died in her sister's back room, and I was 11 years old and I have run notes in this town for 20 years and never once wondered why I got so good at it. Charlotte did not say anything. There's a man named of Josiah Pike, Beck said. Fredericksburg. Drinks too much, dresses like a scarecrow, and hasn't lost a case on a defective instrument in 9 years. Whitfield's beat him twice on other ground and thinks he's a fool. He pulled out a sheet of paper. He'll want $50. I have $50. You have your $50, Beck said. And that's a different thing. And you'd best decide right now whether you're spending it because I ain't writing this letter twice. She spent it. She counted it out of the locked box on the 4th of July 50 of the 412 she had carried out of Harrington Estate in a trunk, and she sat with it in her hands for a full minute before she put it in an envelope. Nathaniel found her doing it. What's that? $50 for a lawyer. Whose $50? Mine. He went white. No. It's already counted. Charlotte, no. He came across the room fast. That is the money you walked out of my house with. That is the only thing in this world that's yours. I will not have you spend it on what? On me. I'm not spending it on you, Charlotte said. I'm spending it on a 19-month-old girl named Charlotte Coleman, and on the reason I found out I could do this at all. She sealed the envelope. And you don't get a vote. That was the arrangement. I take the problem out of your hands. You said the words in front of a witness. You didn't mean it would cost me anything. She looked up at him. Nathaniel, it always cost me something. Every time. For 12 years. You just never once had to watch it come out of a box. He stood there. I'll pay it back. You'll pay it back, she agreed. With interest. 6% annually, not quarterly. I'll draw the note myself, and you'll sign it, and Mrs. Doyle will witness it, and if you're late, I will take you to the county court like anybody else. Nathaniel Harrington stared at his wife. Then he sat down on the edge of the chair and put his face in his hands and laughed until his shoulders shook, and Charlotte could not tell watching him whether it was laughing or the other thing. And after a while, she decided it was both and let him alone. Josiah Pike arrived on the 11th in a coat that had been good in 1806. He read for 2 hours without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "Who found the signature?" "I did," Charlotte said. "You a clerk?" "No." "You read law somewhere?" "I read 12 years of a bad estate," Charlotte said, "which is worse." Pike grunted. "Whitfield's argument will be ratification. 3 years of interest paid. He'll say the estate adopted the debt." "I know." "You know." "He'll say it," Charlotte said, "and then you'll ask him who paid it." Pike's eyes came up. "Go on." "The interest was paid quarterly out of the household disbursement, not the estate account. It's in the ledger in my hand, every quarter entered as Richmond sundry." She turned the book round. "Mr. Harrington never saw those entries. He never entered them. He never signed for them. I did." The room stopped. Nathaniel said very quietly, "You paid it. I paid a bill from Richmond every quarter for 3 years because Whitfield's clerk sent it. And it looked like a legitimate estate charge, and it was $14, Charlotte said. "I never saw the note. I never knew what it was for. Nathaniel, I never asked, because you had told me 16 ways that Richmond was not my business. And once in 15 you told me in front of your brother that I was to leave the Richmond accounts alone." "I don't remember that." "I do," Charlotte said. "I remember every one of them." Josiah Pike put both hands flat on the table. "Ma'am," he said, "do you understand what you've just told me?" "Yes." "Tell him then. He's gone pale." Charlotte turned to her husband. "A ratification has to be made by somebody with authority," she said. "I had no authority. I was a wife with a household purse. You'd said so yourself out loud in front of witnesses more than once that the Richmond business was not mine." She let it land. "Marcus Whitfield's whole case rests on 3 years of payments made by a woman you spent 12 years telling everybody had no standing to make them." Nathaniel Harrington sat down slowly. "My own words," he said. "Your own words. The very thing—" He stopped, started again. "The very thing I did to keep you quiet is the thing that saves the land." "Yes." "That is monstrous." "That is what it is," Charlotte said. Josiah Pike scratched his ear. "It'll want witnesses," he said. "Somebody who heard him say it." "Colonel Pemberton was in the room in 15, Nathaniel said. "And Ashford, and Robert, but Robert's dead." "Will they say it in court?" "Pemberton will say anything that makes him look like the man who was in the room." Nathaniel's mouth twisted. "And Mrs. Ashford will say it whether her husband likes it or not." Pike nodded slowly. "Then I'll want one more thing," he said. "And you ain't going to like it, Mr. Harrington." "Say it." "You'll have to get up in that courtroom in front of your own county," Pike said, "and swear on the book that for 12 years you told your wife she had no authority over your business. Not hint it. Swear it. In front of every man you drink with." He shrugged. "Whitfield'll try to make you out a liar telling a convenient story. The only way through that is if it's plainly a thing that costs you." The kitchen was very quiet. "How badly will it cost me?" Nathaniel said. "You'll not be asked to dine in Richmond again," said Josiah Pike. "So." The county court sat on the 28th of August. Charlotte did not go in. She sat on a bench in the passage outside with Mrs. Doyle on one side and Ruth Coles on the other. Because Josiah Pike had said it plain, the minute they see a woman's hand on this Whitfield'll say she's the one running it. And that's exactly the story we're killing. And she had known he was right, and had hated it, and had sat down on the bench. Ruth held her hand the whole 3 hours. At one point, the door opened, and a clerk went past, and they heard through it Marcus Whitfield's voice saying, "Paid it, sir, quarterly for 3 years, which is as plain an adoption of the dead as—" And then the door shut. At the second hour, Mrs. Doyle said, "You all right?" "No." "Good," Mrs. Doyle said. "Woman who's all right on a bench like this ain't paying attention." At 2:20, the door opened again and did not shut. Nathaniel Harrington came out. He came out with his collar undone and his face the color of ash, and he walked straight past Pike and past the clerk and past a knot of Richmond men who were staring at him, and he came to the bench and he stopped in front of his wife. "Well," Charlotte said, "he asked me if I had ever told you that you had no authority in my business. And I said yes." Nathaniel's voice was not steady. "He asked me how many times. I said I could not count them. He asked me to give the court an example, so I gave him the one from 15 in front of Robert. And Pemberton. Pemberton swore to it." A muscle jumped in his cheek. "And then Whitfield asked me, Charlotte, in front of 40 men, whether it was not the case that I had lately been going about the county, saying my wife ran the whole estate, and whether both things could be true." Charlotte's hand tightened on Ruth's. "What did you say?" "I said they were both true," Nathaniel said. "I said she ran every acre of it, and I let no one know, least of all her, and that I had spent 12 years taking the credit for it out loud, and telling her privately she had no standing, and that if the court found that shameful, the court was correct." Ruth Coles made a small sound. And then Judge Wells took off his spectacles," Nathaniel said. "And he said, and I will remember this until I am in the ground," he said, "Mr. Harrington, I have known your family 30 years, and I have never heard a Harrington say a true thing that hurt him." Charlotte could not speak. "He struck the note," Nathaniel said. "Whitfield takes nothing. The estate owes him the 3 years of interest back and nothing else, and Pike says he'll not get that either if we press it, and I told Pike we won't press it because I want that man out of my life more than I want his money." Mrs. Doyle exhaled through her teeth. "The West section stands, all 4 farms, the Colemans stay, and Charlotte Whitmore, who had not cried in front of another human being since 1817 in a rented room over a boarding house, put her face in her hands on a bench in a courthouse passage and cried in front of 3 people and did not care one bit who saw it. He found her outside 20 minutes later. "They're waiting on me in there. Pike's got papers." "Then go." "In a minute." He stood in front of her. "Charlotte, there's a thing I want to say, and I want to say it before anybody comes out that door, and it gets said in front of an audience because I've had enough of audiences today to last me my life." "Say it." "Judge Wells asked me one more question after it was done, off the record. He asked me who found the signature." Charlotte went still. "What did you tell him?" "I told him my wife did." Nathaniel said, "I told him she found it at 10 minutes to 3 in the morning in a boarding house kitchen in Millbrook. After a day's work, she was not paid for using books she was told for 12 years she had no business touching. And he asked me, was she a clerk? And I said, no, sir. She is the reason my family still owns land." Charlotte turned her face away. "Don't. I'm not asking you to come home. Nathaniel, listen, I'm not." He said it hard, almost angrily. "I've had 5 months to work out what I want, and I only got it straight sitting in that box this morning. I don't want you home. Home is a house where you did everything and nobody said your name. That house should not exist, and I'm not asking you back into it." Charlotte looked up. "Then what?" "I don't know yet," Nathaniel Harrington said. "That's the honest answer, and it's the first time in my life I've given one to a question that mattered. I don't know what it is. I only know it isn't that." He put his hat on. "You've got a back room in Millbrook with 14 women in it and a girl who's on page 9. I'm not taking you out of that. I'd sooner sell the West section myself." He turned toward the courthouse door. "Nathaniel." He stopped. "That's the first thing you've said in 5 months." Charlotte said, "That didn't have a task in it." He almost smiled. "Well," he said, "I reckon I'm learning." He was learning, and it took him the whole of that winter to prove it, and the winter of 1817 into 1818, was the worst Virginia had seen in 19 years. It came early. The first hard freeze was the 9th of November, 3 weeks before anybody was ready for it, and by the first week of December, there were farms between Millbrook and the river where the water in the house had ice on it at noon. Charlotte found out how bad it was going to be from Sari. The girl came in on the second Thursday of December with her hands wrapped in rags and sat down at the end of the table and did not open her primer. "Sari." "Ma'am." "Where's your book?" "Home." "You've never once left that book at home." The girl's chin went down. "We ain't got the corn," she said. "Pa figured it at Thanksgiving and it come out short, and he figured it again Sunday, and it come out shorter, and he says come January, we'll be eating the seed." She said it flat, the way children say the things they have heard through a wall. "He says there ain't no use me walking 4 miles twice a week to learn reading if we're going to be off the place by spring." The room had gone quiet around her. Charlotte set down her pen. "How many families?" "Ma'am." "How many families in this township are eating the seed corn in January, Sari?" The girl thought about it seriously, because she was 15 and had been raised to answer a question with the truth. "Orn," she said. "The Tates, the 2 Hollis places. Ms. Rook only she ain't got nobody left to feed but herself, so she don't count it." She looked up. "And Pa says the Coles place is thin too, but Ms. Coles won't say." Every head at that table turned toward Ruth. Ruth Coles put both hands flat on the table and looked straight ahead. "I got till the middle of February," she said. "Ruth." "I got till the middle of February, and I'd have said so when it was February." "You'd have said so never," Charlotte said, "and I know that because I spent 12 years not saying so, and I recognize the face." Ruth's mouth trembled, and she pressed it flat. "Well," she said, "it ain't a paper, is it? You can't read us out of a winter." Charlotte stood up. "No," she said, "but I can count us through 1. She sat up that night with Mrs. Doyle and did the thing she was best at in the world. She made a list. Not of what people needed, anybody could make that list, and it was a list that only ever made people feel worse. She made the other list. She made the list of what the township had, which nobody had ever made, because nobody in Millbrook had ever had cause to add up all the small hidden surplus of 40 poor households at one time. Alma Rook had a barn half full of last year's hay and 1 horse to eat it. The Mrs. Pryor had a cellar of preserved beans and no children. The mill had bran. The mill always had bran, and Harlan Beck sold it as hog feed at 11 cents the bushel, because that was what bran was worth. Old Man Tate had 40 laying hens and no corn to feed them, which meant he would kill the hens in January and eat them in a week and have no eggs in the spring. Alma Rook's hay would feed Tate's hens through to March. Tate's eggs would feed the Hollis children. The Hollis boys were 16 and 18 and had nothing to do all winter but 2 strong backs, and Mrs. Doyle's woodlot had not been cut in 4 years. "It's not charity," Charlotte said at 1 in the morning with 9 sheets of paper in front of her. "That's the thing. Every one of these people has got something rotting in a barn and something missing in a cellar, and there is not one soul in this town whose business it is to know both." Mrs. Doyle looked at the papers. "There is now," she said. Pug. They called it the Winter Book. It was Mrs. Doyle who named it, and Ruth Coles who kept it. And by the 3rd week of December, there were 31 households in it, and the rule of it was 1 line long, and Charlotte wrote it at the top of the first page. Nothing given. Everything written down. That was the whole of it. Nobody in that township would take charity. Charlotte had known that before she started, because she had spent 12 years among people who would sooner starve upright than eat sitting down at somebody else's expense. So nothing was given. Alma Rook's hay went to Tate at a price, and the price was written, and Tate's eggs went to Hollis at a price, and that was written, and the Hollis boys cut Mrs. Doyle's woodlot at 11 cents the hour, and that was written too, and not $1 of actual money moved through the whole of it from December to March. It moved on paper, in a book, kept by a widow who 11 months earlier could not read the paper on her own mantle. By the 8th of January, there were 52 households in the Winter Book. By the 22nd, there were 71, and they had come in from 4 miles out from beyond the mill from the far side of the river where nobody had heard of Charlotte Whitmore, except as a rumor about a woman in a back room. And on the 26th of January, Harlan Beck stood in the doorway of that back room with his hat in his hands for the second time in his life. "I got 1,100 bushels of bran." "I know what you've got." "I sell bran at 11 cents. "I know what you sell it at." Beck turned the hat over. "I'll do it at 4, he said. "Through March. Wrote in that book same as everybody. And I don't want it forgave, and I don't want it talked about in church." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. "Why 4? "Because it cost me 3.5 to make." Harlan Beck said, "And I ain't a saint, ma'am, and I'd like to be able to tell my mother's ghost I'd done something." 40 miles east, the same winter was doing the same thing to Harrington Estate, and Nathaniel Harrington was finding out what it was to be the man who could not fix it. He wrote to her on the 14th of December. "Charlotte, the freeze has taken the late corn on the low ground. I have gone through the figures 4 times. If I hold the tenants' rents as they stand, I clear the year. If I remit them, I do not, and I will have to sell the timber on the East Ridge, which my father planted, and which I have always been told is the last thing a Harrington sells. I am not asking you to tell me what to do. I am telling you what I am about to do, because I have realized I have never once in my life told anybody what I was about to do before I did it. I am remitting the rents, all of them, the whole quarter. I have sold the ridge to Ashford at a figure that shames me, and I have taken it because he was the only man who would pay in December. Coleman came to the house to ask for time on his, and I had already sent the notice out, and he stood in my hall with his hat off and could not get the words out, and I could not tell whether he was ashamed or whether it was the cold. It was the cold. He had walked. I have given him the gray mare, which is the only thing I have ever given anybody without being asked." And Charlotte read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the trunk with the other one, and she noticed with a kind of grim honesty she had learned to have with herself that she had put them in the same place, and that there were now 11 letters in that trunk, and only 2 of them were from her father. She wrote back 4 lines. "Nathaniel, you sold the ridge in the worst month of the worst winter in 19 years, and you will be told so for the rest of your life by men who did not have to make the decision. Do not let them tell you it was foolish, it was expensive. Those are different things, and you have never once in your life had to know the difference until now. See." The 16th of February was the day it broke. It broke the way these things break, not in a storm, but 3 days after one, when the melt came fast and the river came up 11 feet in a night and took out the ford below the mill and cut the whole eastern half of the township off from the store, the mill, the church, and the winter book. 71 households, 38 of them on the wrong side. Ruth Coles came into the back room at 7 in the morning with her skirt wet to the thigh. "The ford's gone." "I heard it." "You don't understand. It's gone, Charlotte. Not undergone. Took the stone out. Beck's man says 3 weeks before a wagon crosses it, and the water's still coming up." Charlotte was already at the book. "How many on the far side are drawing bran this month?" Ruth flipped pages with wet hands. 19, 20 with the Tates only they're this side. 19. And the eggs is all this side. Then the Hollis children eat, and the far side doesn't. Charlotte's finger went down the column. "Ruth, how long have they got?" Ruth's finger stopped. She did not answer. "Ruth." "Some of 'em's got 9 days," Ruth said. "Some of 'em's got 4. The room went absolutely still, and then a girl's voice from the end of the table said, "There's the old crossing." Every head turned. Sari had her book open. She had not been to school 4 months, and she came anyway twice a week 4 miles, and she had said perhaps 9 words in that room since December. "What old crossing?" "Up above the Hollis place, where the rocks is." Sari was going red to the ears. "Pa says it ain't safe for a wagon." "But it ain't safe for a wagon in June, ma'am. It's safe for a horse. I've been across it." "When?" "Lots of times," Sari said. And then because she was 15 and honest, Pa don't know. It took a horse and a man who knew the ford, and by nightfall it had turned out that there were not enough of either. There were 4 men in that township who would ride the upper crossing in February water, and 2 of them had families on the near side and would not go. And Charlotte did not blame them, and said so out loud so that nobody else could say it behind their backs. That left 2. 2 men, 19 households in 4 days. She sent the letter to Harrington Estate at 8 o'clock that night, and she gave the boy $1 to write it through the dark, and she wrote it in 9 words, because there was no time for anything else, and because she had finally learned at 42 that the whole trick of asking is to ask. Ford gone. 19 families cut off. I need men and horses. C. He came on the 18th. He came with 9 men, 4 wagons that could not cross, and were never meant to 11 horses, 600 pounds of Harrington cornmeal, and Elias. He did not ride down Mill Street. He came in the back way past the mill, and he sent Elias to the boarding house first with his hat in his hand, and the message Elias delivered in Mrs. Doyle's kitchen was 6 words long. He says, "Where do you want us?" Charlotte put down her pen. "Say that again." He says, Elias repeated, "Where do you want us, ma'am?" Them's his words. He made me say them back to him twice on the road, so I'd not soften them. Ruth Coles made a sound that was half a laugh. Charlotte stood up and reached for her shawl and said, "Then we'd better not waste them." For 4 days, Nathaniel Harrington took orders from his wife in front of 30 people. That was the thing the township never forgot. And it was the thing that got told in Millbrook for 40 years afterward, long after everybody in the story was dead. Not the corn, not the money. The fact that a Virginia gentleman with 9 men of his own stood in the mud at the upper crossing on the 19th of February, 1818 and said, "Where do you want us, ma'am?" out loud in front of Harlan Beck and the Hollis boys and 2 Pryor sisters and a 15-year-old girl, and then did what he was told. She put him on the near bank counting loads. He did not like it. She saw him not like it. He wanted to be in the water with the horses, because that was the visible thing, and the brave thing, and the thing that would have been told about him afterward. And Charlotte Whitmore looked at him across a mud bank and said, "You can't swim a strange ford. You'll go under and take a horse with you, and then I'll have 20 families and a drowned man. Count the loads." And Nathaniel Harrington said, "Yes, ma'am," and counted the loads. On the second day, he made an error and put 80 pounds of meal on the wrong list, and she found it, and she told him about it in front of Beck. "That's the Hollis load. It's marked Tate." "I marked it as it came off the horse." "Then you marked it wrong." He opened his mouth, and Harlan Beck, watching, saw the exact moment the man decided not to say the thing he had been about to say, saw a 41-year-old Virginia gentleman swallow 12 years of habit whole, and heard him say instead, "You're right. I'll do it again from the start." Beck told that story for 20 years, too. On the 3rd night, with the water finally dropping, they sat on the near bank and did not talk for a long time. 19 households, Charlotte said at last. All of them fed to the 1st of March. "I make it 21. 2 came in this morning from beyond the Hollis place." 21 then. "You've done it, Charlotte." "We've done it," she said, "and I want you to notice that I said that because I have not said it about anything in 5 years. He laughed quietly. Then he said, "May I tell you a thing I have not told anybody?" "Go on." "I did not come here for you." Charlotte turned her head. "I mean that," Nathaniel said. "When your letter came, I read it, and I was on the road inside 40 minutes, and I did not stop to think about it. And it was somewhere past the 2nd stage before I understood that I had not thought about you once. I'd thought about 19 families in 4 days, and how many horses a man can move in that time." He rubbed his hands together. "And I sat on that horse in the dark, and I thought, that's new. That is a brand new thing in your life at 41 years of age. To go somewhere because a thing needs doing, and not because of what it makes you. That's not nothing. It's not everything either." "No," Charlotte agreed. "But it's the first thing you've ever built that I didn't build for you." The water was down by the 23rd. The men went home on the 24th. Nathaniel stayed one more day, and on the morning of the 25th, he came to the boarding house and found Charlotte at the table with the winter book open in front of her, and Ruth on one side and Mrs. Doyle on the other, and he stood in the doorway until she looked up. "I'm going back today." "I know. There's a thing I want to say, and I have thought about how to say it for a year, and I've got about 4 different versions of it, and I'd like to say the plain one." Mrs. Doyle started to get up. "Stay," Nathaniel said. "Ma'am, stay. I have learned that the ones I say in front of witnesses are the ones that hold." Mrs. Doyle sat back down and folded her arms and looked at him with the expression of a woman who is prepared to be unimpressed. Nathaniel put his hat on the table. "I'm not going to ask you to come home," he said. "I told you that in August, and I meant it, and I mean it more now than I did then. That house was a place where you did everything, and nobody said your name, and I would not put you back into it if you begged me. Then what are you asking? I'm not asking anything." His hands were flat on the back of a chair. "I'm going to tell you what I've done, and you can do what you like with it." "Go on." "I've had Pike draw a deed," Nathaniel said. "The west section. 4 farms, 640 acres, and it's the piece Whitfield tried to take, and the piece you saved at 10 minutes to 3 in the morning in this kitchen." He took a breath. "It's yours, in your own name. Charlotte Whitmore, not Harrington Pike, says it can be done that way, and it's been done. And Judge Wells has already seen the papers and says he'll not stand in the way of it." The room did not make a sound. "Nathaniel, let me finish, or I'll not get through it." His jaw was tight. "It's not a gift. I want that understood by everyone in this room. It's not me giving you something, and it is not me buying anything, and if you think for 1 minute that I have come up here to pay for you—" He stopped. His voice had gone. Charlotte watched her husband stand in a boarding house kitchen and be unable to finish a sentence because of 4 words he had said in a study 13 months before, and she found to her own astonishment that she was not glad about it. "Say it," she said gently. "I have thought about that sentence every day for a year," Nathaniel said. "I paid for her, not you. I have taken it out and looked at it every single day, and there is no bottom to it. And the worst of it is not the cruelty. It's that it was true. It was a true description of exactly how I had been living. I paid for the woman who cost me something, and I did not pay for the woman who cost me nothing. And the reason you cost me nothing is that you never once asked, and the reason you never asked is that I built 12 years of a marriage where asking was not done." Ruth Coles had her hand over her mouth. "So it's not a gift," Nathaniel said. "It's a correction. You ran that estate for 12 years and were paid nothing, and the west section is not what that's worth, because nothing is what that's worth. But it is what I have got, and it is the piece you saved, and it is in your name whether you ever speak to me again or not." Charlotte sat very still. "And if I say no—" "You can't," Nathaniel said. "It's done. It's recorded. That's the point of doing it that way." Something like a smile crossed his face and did not stay. "I've spent my whole life being able to take things back. I wanted to do one thing I couldn't." She did not answer him that day. She did not answer him for 11 days, and she was honest with herself about why, and the why was this: she was afraid. Not of him. She had stopped being afraid of Nathaniel Harrington on a wagon seat in February of 1817 and had never taken it up again. She was afraid of herself, because she knew she had always known that the pull of that house was not the house. It was the ease. It was 12 years of muscle that knew exactly how to be needed and exactly how to disappear while doing it, and she had spent a year building a woman who did not disappear, and she did not trust that woman yet. She said so to Mrs. Doyle on the 4th night. "Then don't go," Mrs. Doyle said. "That's not advice, that's just the other thing. It's the only advice I've got, and I'll tell you why." The old woman set down her cup. "My husband was a good man. He was. And he died and left me $62 of debt on a paper I didn't know how to read, and I paid interest on it for 11 years and never once touched it. And you know what? The worst of that was, it weren't the money. It was that I'd got so used to not understanding my own life that I stopped trying. She looked up. You'd not stop trying now, that's the difference. You'd go into that house a different woman than the one that walked out of it. How do you know? Because you've got a book with 71 families in it, Mrs. Doyle said, and it's got your name on the front of it, and you wrote it there yourself. She went back to Harrington Estate on the 14th of March, 1818. She went by her own arrangement in a hired trap, and she did not send word ahead, and she stopped at the west section first, and stood on the road at the Coleman place until Josiah Coleman came out of the barn and stopped dead. Ma'am? Mr. Coleman? They said. He took his hat off. They said the section's yours now. It is. Coleman looked at his boots, then at the house, then at her. There's a thing my wife's been at me about since November, he said. She says I'm to say it, and I ain't had the chance, and now, here you are, stood in the road, so I reckon I'd best. Say it. We named the girl for you, Josiah Coleman said. In 13, Charlotte. And you never come and looked at her not once in 5 years, and Mary says, that's because you never knew, and I said, don't be foolish, woman. Of course she knows. And Mary says. He stopped and started again. Mary says nobody in that house ever told you anything you'd have liked to hear. Charlotte's throat closed. Your wife, she said when she could, is a very shrewd woman. She is that. Is the child at home? She's 5-year-old and stood behind that door listening this whole time. Coleman said, same as she does everything. She got to the house at 4 in the afternoon. Nathaniel came out onto the steps in his shirt sleeves, the same steps 13 months later, and neither of them missed it. And he stopped halfway down and put his hands at his sides and said absolutely nothing at all, which she recognized as the single hardest thing he had ever done. I've come to say a few things, Charlotte said, and then I'm going back to Millbrook tonight because there are 14 women expecting me Thursday, and I have never once missed a Thursday. All right. First, I'm keeping the west section. It's yours. There's no keeping about it. Second, I'm keeping the room at Mrs. Doyle's, and I'll be there Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday every week, and that is not a temporary arrangement, and it is not a thing I will be talked out of in 6 months when it gets inconvenient. Nathaniel nodded once. Third, Charlotte's voice did not change at all. I'll come here Friday to Monday and I'll run this estate because I'm better at it than you, and we both know it, and I'm past pretending otherwise, and I will be paid for it. Something went across his face. Paid. $200 the year drawn quarterly from the estate account entered in the book by name C. Whitmore Management, where any man who opens that ledger can read it. She held his eyes. And if you say yes to that too easily, I will turn round and go back to Millbrook tonight, because I want you to feel what it costs to write my name in a book. Nathaniel Harrington stood on the steps of his own house. It doesn't cost me anything, he said. That's the Charlotte, that's the whole shame of it. $200 is nothing. I spent more than that on a necklace. I know exactly what you spent on the necklace, Charlotte said. I found the receipt. The silence after that was the longest of his life. Then let it cost me the other thing, he said at last. Let it cost me the county. I'll write it in the book, and I'll not hide the book. And when Pemberton opens it, and he's opened every ledger in Virginia, he'll read, C. Whitmore Management 200. And inside a week, every man between here and Richmond will know that Nathaniel Harrington pays his wife to run his land because he cannot. Yes, Charlotte said. They will. Good, he said, and meant it. But she did not go back to Millbrook that night. She stayed, and they sat in the study, the same study, and neither of them missed that either, and she went through the estate book with him for 4 hours and found 9 errors, and at the end of it she closed the ledger and said, There's a 4th thing. Go on. I'm not your wife again. He went very still. Not yet, Charlotte said. Maybe not ever, and I want you to hear that plainly, and not go away and privately decide I meant not yet. I might mean never. I don't know. She folded her hands. I know that I'm 42 years old, and I have got a book with 71 families in it, and 640 acres in my own name, and a girl in Millbrook who's on page 91 of a primer. And I have got all of that because I got up out of a chair in this room 13 months ago and took off a ring. I know. You don't, she said. Not all the way. And that's all right because I don't need you to. That's the part I came here to tell you, and it's the part that took me a year to be able to say without my voice going. She looked at him steadily. I did not leave to make you chase me, Nathaniel. I've heard it said in 3 counties that I did, and I want it said once in this room by me. I did not leave to be followed. I left because I could not remember who I was, and I was running out of years to find out. Nathaniel Harrington sat with his hands on his knees. And did you find out? Yes. Will you tell me? Charlotte thought about it. I'm a woman who reads what other people can't, she said. That's all it ever was. 12 years I did it in this room with the door shut, and now I do it in a back room with the door open, and it turns out that was the only difference in the whole world. He put his face down for a moment. When he raised it, he said, May I say the thing I've been trying to say since June? You've said a great deal since June. I've said a great deal of it wrong. He leaned forward. Charlotte, I don't want you back because I need you. I need you. God knows I need you. This place needs you. I couldn't find 9 errors in that book in 9 years. But that's not it, and I know it's not it because a man can need a horse. That's an unfortunate comparison. It's the right one, he said. It's the one I earned. I called you practical in a room full of people, and I meant it as a compliment, and that's the whole indictment right there. He took a breath. I want you beside me because I have finally understood what you're worth. Not what you're worth to me. What you're worth. There's a difference, and it took me 42 years and a courthouse and a flooded Ford to see it. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up and put the ledger under her arm. That was a good speech, she said. It isn't a speech. No, she said. This time I don't believe it is. She was in Millbrook on Thursday. She was in Millbrook every Thursday for 11 years, and Harrington Estate every Friday through Monday, and see. Whitmore Management went into the estate book on the 1st of April 1818 in her own hand and stayed there quarterly for the rest of her life. Colonel Pemberton read it in June exactly as predicted and said so at the Ashfords' table exactly as predicted. And Mrs. Ashford, 81 years old and past caring, put down her fork and said, Colonel, I have eaten at that woman's table for 6 years and never once been given a lily. And if you have got a criticism of her wages, you may take it up with the 14 families on the west section who are still on their land. And that was the last time anybody in Virginia said it out loud. Sari Tate finished the primer in September of 1818 and was teaching it herself by 1821. Ruth Coles kept the winter book for 19 years, and it was still being kept in another woman's hand when she died. The ring stayed on the desk in the study for 2 years exactly where Charlotte had set it down. She put it back on in the spring of 1820, not because he asked, because he never asked again, not once in 26 months. She put it back on because she woke one morning in her own house on her own land and understood that she wanted to, and that wanting a thing and needing it are not the same, and that she was at last a woman who could tell the difference. They were married another 29 years, and in all that time, in every room in front of every man in Virginia who cared to listen, Nathaniel Harrington never once said the word practical about his wife again, because he had learned at the cost of everything he had that a woman is not what a man is willing to pay for her. She is what she is worth when nobody is paying at all.